Hey guys, welcome back to the 5 card Pillow Mastermind. My name is Fabian, and today I want to talk about check raising in 5 card Pillow. In general, check raising, one of my favorite topics, a topic that I've worked on a lot in 4 card and 5 card Pillow, and it is, I think, a topic that very often is a little bit neglected by a lot of players, and that's why I actually like to talk about it so much or like to study it so much, because I think there's there are lots of edges that can be gained from studying check raising. So in this video, I will discuss how often we should check raise, then what type of hands we should check raise, and then we will have a little check raise practice session in the end. So I will go into PLO Trainer and into the 5 card PLO Trainer, and then we will look at a few different hands, see how they do, why do we check raise them, what's the goal, and I will walk you through my thought process when looking at different hands or hand classes. So let's start with a few numbers here in the beginning. So how often should we check raise? And we can see here we have an example board, King 8-7, which we will also work with later throughout the video. So on King 8-7, we're raising 13% of the time. And this is I would say, pretty average check raising frequency. So the check raising frequency in general are like on most boards are between 11 and 17%. 17% definitely on the higher end, 11 or 10, maybe even sometimes 10% on the lower end. I would say on average we are looking at like 13, maybe 14, 12-ish check raising percentage on many boards. The boards with the highest check raising frequencies are actually rainbow boards with a high number of draws. So for example, these medium draws like Jack 8-4 or Jack 8 deuce, 10-7-4, and so on, like where you have a bunch of middling cards that offer a lot of draws, but you don't have a flush draw on the board. These boards usually have very high check raising frequencies, up to 17%, like I said. One thing we should look out for, or it's one thing that I immediately look at when I study check raises, is how often do we check raise fold? Because I think it gives us a very good idea of how strong actually our check raising range is, or like how about the amount of bluffs that we should have in our check raising range. And so the check raise folding frequency is on average, I would say, 5% lower compared to 4-card PLO. So in 4-card PLO, depending on the board texture, after we're check raising and then we face a 3-bet from the original c-better, we're folding between 35 and 50% usually. And on 5-card PLO, on many boards, this frequency drops by like 5%. So we're folding between 30 and 45% of our range. And this is quite a lot. So I can't emphasize this enough. I've talked about this in 4-card videos as well. You have to, or not you have to, but there is in solver world, there's a lot of check raise folding going on. And if you do not find these check raise folds, it probably means that you're under check raising. And if we're talking about these check raising frequencies between 11 and 17% here, I think these are numbers that even a lot of regulars don't match. So if you're playing on sites where HUDs are allowed, maybe look into your HUD. What does like a good regular have as a check raising frequency in a single raise pot heads up? I think a lot of these players, I think the more aggressive ones will maybe have like 10%, maybe 11%, and then the tighter ones will be around 8, maybe 6 or 7 even, which is way too tight, of course. But in reality, it should be probably more like 13 to 14%. So it's definitely, and this is because, yeah, they're not finding enough check raise folds. Like, think about how often when your opponent check raises, and if you 3-bet, how often do they actually fold? A lot of players, especially in 5-card pillow, they don't have a check raise folding range at all. They just have hands that they go with and hands that they slow play / pot control. So they just check call instead of check raise. But check raise folding is not really a thing for a lot of players, but it's a big part of a fundamentally sound approach. So let's move a little bit into what kind of hands we should check raise here. And to do this, I first look at what kind of hands should we check raise fold. And you see here a bunch of different hands, and I will go through them one by one. And what we do with them when we face a check raise. So these are all hands that we are check raising, and we're check raising them with a reasonable frequency. So I try to not pick hands that we're check raising like 1% of the time or 5% of the time or whatever, but these are high frequency check raises in the first place. And then we can see here what we're doing when we're facing a 3-bet. And so we can see in general we're folding 27% here on this board. And then we're calling 39 and we're raising 34%. So also a bunch of calling going on here actually on this board, and not so much just like check raise and stack off. So the first hand class, or the what I said, like, is very important to look at the bluffs. What are our bluffs here? And we can see here the first hand that's kind of maybe not super intuitive, but what we can see here is we have 3 hard blockers in our hand. So we have 3 flush draw blockers. Those are usually good candidates to go for a check raise. What is kind of surprising here that we also have the open-ender on top of it. So in 4-card pillow, that is something that you usually wouldn't see because you don't want to raise, you don't want to waste like an open-ender with a flush draw as a check raise fold. Not that often anyways. Like sometimes maybe in 4-card, but not that often. In 5-card, however, it's different because you have such a high number of good draws that this is actually like not that good of a draw, of course. Like we only have a 10 high flush draw, we have 3 hearts in our hand, and given all the features that we have in our hand, like they all block draws, they all block parts of the board. Like there's not a single card in our hand that's not interacting with the board. So this should mean that we have a lot of fold equity with this hand when we are going for the check raise. However, when the money goes in or when our opponent 3-bets, he either has a set which is usually in pretty good shape against us, or some sets are maybe like even almost flipping against us, but very often sets will also have some kind of backup or maybe have some of our outs blocked in a way. So it's just not doable for us to stack off with a hand like 10-10, 9-9-5 with 3 hearts in our hand. So we're just going to check raise fold this. Another hand that is really interesting, that is maybe surprising to some of you, is Ace King 8-7-4. So we are looking at 3-pair with a backdoor flush draw and a heart. And this hand is also somewhat of a high frequency check raise. And yeah, this hand is simply not strong enough to stack off, and so we're check raise folding. And I think here you maybe need to challenge your assumptions about bluffs and value bets a little bit when it comes to check raising here, because of course when we have 3-pair, if you look at 3-pair just in terms of pure hand strength or hand value, like we have 3-pair, that's not a bluff usually. But if you look at the equity, like our equities, like we don't have enough equity to stack off, and so this hand is kind of a bluff because it's kind of a low equity hand that we actually are happy to make our opponent fold, and if our opponent calls, we have some equity to continue in the pot. So our equity here is more or less like you could view this as a weak draw, but like we're drawing to a boat basically, because whenever we're not making a boat, like it's horrible for us to play the hand like on the turn, right? So it's like a lower equity draw to a boat in a way. That's maybe an interesting way to look at it. And so don't have in your mind, okay, this is 3-pair, this is purely for value. No, it's not. Like, yes, of course, you can go, there's upsides to this. So when you check raise a hand like this, you can get called by worse hands. You can get called by hands that you're flipping against, and then you have some good runouts for your hand. But you also have some fold equity. You have some important blockers to the board because you're blocking so many pairs. And so this hand is a decent candidate to go for a check raise fold. However, not all of these hands are going to be check raise folds. Like all of these 3-pair or like weak 2-pair type of hands, like a bunch of them will also go for the traditional line, which is check calling, of course. And then another hand that's maybe a little bit interesting, and that is Ace King 3 deuce deuce. So we have top pair, we have a backdoor flush draw, and we have a low flush draw. And so the solver also decides to check raise fold this hand because we basically don't have the best playability, even if we have like a flush draw and a backdoor flush draw, but we have to fold almost all the turns. Like, and a good turn for us would maybe be like a 3, and we even block that. And of course, a deuce is also pretty good. An ace and a king also pretty good. So there's a number of turns we can play on. But in general, we would kind of prefer to just end the hand right there. And so we're check raise folding a hand like Ace King 3 deuce deuce. When we look at the calling frequency, or at the hands that we're calling here, we look at ace 10 9 6 5, and we can see this is a pretty strong hand. We have a rep with a nut flush draw, and of course we're going to check raise a hand as strong as this. And by the way, this is in general like a topic or like a pattern that you will see on every board. So on every board, you're going to check raise the strongest of your hands. So as you can see here on the right as well, like ace, king, king, 9, 6, top set, nut flush draw, open ender, we're going to check raise this because there's still a bunch of other hands that we can get value from, even if we have so many blockers. So in a single raise pot at this SPR, so at a high SPR, there's no slow playing with our nuts really, like with our strongest hands. There's some rare circumstances where it's actually where you sometimes call these kind of hands, but not on a board like king 8-7, because even if you have a hand like ace king king 9-6 with a nut flush draw, there's still plenty of other hands that your opponent can call or continue with. But on some other boards, sometimes in 5-card PLO, it's possible to block the board so hard that it's so hard for your opponent to have something that then you will take some of the super strongest hands as your check calls, basically. The way that I described this to a friend of mine was basically you're going to check raise the super nuts, but not the super duper nuts, if that makes sense. Like it's so if you're totally crushing the board, and that means crushing it even harder than having top set with a nut flush draw and an open ender, then maybe you could consider calling. But this is so few occasions really that you should in general just have in mind the strongest of my hands, I will always go for a check raise. And so we can see compared to, or like ace 10 9 6 5, so this is like we have a nut flush draw with a rep. This is also a very strong hand. And for example, coming back to the concept of like bluff versus value, like this is more or less like this is a value check raise. If we look at the equity that this hand has, it's just like because we will make our hand so often that on more runouts, or like we can value bet on more runouts than we can't in the future, basically. So there's more runouts where we can bet for value than there's runouts where we have to, where we cannot bet for value, or where we will not make our hand. So in my mind, this is more like a value bet, even if we don't have a made hand on the flop yet. What these hands have in common here is they have pretty clear plans for the turn, and that's why they can actually call. So a hand like ace 10 9 6 5, like if your opponent 3-bets, you can actually call, because if you have these blockers, if you have the nut flush draw into rep, it's a little bit less likely that your opponent has like the same kind of draw. It's like not that likely that your opponent has like a queen high flush draw with a rep or whatever. In general, he's more likely to have 2 pair with a flush draw and some straight blockers, or a set with a flush draw, or just a set. He will have these kinds of hands, and so it's so basically we can call here and then fold the board pairs on the turn, for example. Same is true for a hand like king king jack 9 deuce. So if we're facing a 3-bet with this hand, it's very likely that our opponent has like a very strong combo draw. And if we just jam it all in here on the flop, I mean, it's also fine with a hand like this, and we will see other hands, other top sets without a lot of backup that will actually go for the jam. But basically what we can do here is also we can dodge like bad turns. So if the turn is, for example, the 6 of hearts or whatever, we can probably consider check folding, depending on the bet size that our opponent bets and so on. So what these hands have in common, they have a pretty clear plan for the turn. Also here, king, king, 7, 7 deuce. If we have a hand like this, even blocking our own outs, we're actually like not even pushing equity against like the strong combo draws. Like we're probably flipping, maybe even slightly behind when we're blocking our own boat outs. So that's not what we're looking for. So the mediocre hands that have like a clear plan for the turn, they're going to be all calls, our check raise calls. And then our check raise stack offs are basically the strongest hands, like ace, king, king, 9, 6. We just want to get all the money in as soon as possible. And then we also have hands, for example, like jack 10 9 8 8. This is a hand that has a lot of features, but for example, the issue with this hand is like the pocket 8s are a little are only the second set, and then the flush draw is only jack high. So when the flush draw is only jack high, that's like not very great playability for the turn. So what we prefer to do here is we have a little bit of everything, and actually this hand is also ahead against top set on the flop here. So we are happy to stack off here, and we want to avoid having to play turns with like a lot of like second nutty component here in our hand. Same is true a little bit for the king 6-3-3 with a 6-side flush draw. So we have that additional backup equity that, or like, which is probably like the flush draw usually is not live when we are the ones also having kings. But at least it works as blockers to our opponent. So our opponent will make his flush less often. And we don't really want to call and then having to play like a 6-side flush potentially on the turn. So what we will do is just we take this additional equity that we have and we jam on the flop. And so that's what we will do. If you have never looked into check raising also in 4-card pillow, maybe this is a little bit overwhelming. Maybe not all the concepts are super familiar, but we will jump into a practice session now. And you will actually see that at least on this board, but also on many other boards, from my experience, check raising or learning how to check raise in 5-card pillow is a lot easier than in 4-card pillow because you have like less of these like low frequency plays. So for example, in 4-card pillow, you will have, for example, you will have your top sets, and then you will, you know, in 4-card pillow, okay, I want to check raise my strongest top sets, and then check call my weakest ones. But then the mediocre ones, you very often do like a little bit of mixing, like a little bit of check raising, a little bit of calling, and it's kind of hard to like figure out what exact blocker do you want to have. In 5-card, we have way more information, or like way more, one card more, to determine basically the strength of our hand. And so if we can use that additional information to create clearer hand classes or hand categories. And so you will see that when we jump into the practice, that it's actually a lot easier to make a decision based on the blockers that we have in our hand. So what I have here is an instance of the pillow trainer, 5-card pillow trainer. I already did a bunch of hands here, as you can see before. And I will go through a bunch of hands here, look at a few different hand classes, and talk about my decision making here when facing a bet. One more thing that we should notice is that in 5-card pillow, the leading ranges are higher. The leading frequencies are higher. Actually, in this spot, we're supposed to lead like a quarter of the time because this spot is actually so good for us. A lot of people don't do that, and so if you're the in-position player, please take that into consideration. You should adjust your c-betting strategies if you're facing someone who is never leading, like on any board, that you should c-bet way tighter, especially if leading frequencies are as high as 25% like on this board. Anyway, let's talk about this spot here with the given ranges. So we have top pair, open ender, and a nut flush draw. Definitely a value check raise. We have a little bit like some components of everything. If our opponent has a hand like 2-pair, we are in like super good shape here. Definitely a hand that we want to check raise and then stack off or maybe call. I'm not 100% sure about this. I would probably stack off with a hand like ace king jack 9-6. Ace jack jack 10-6, very easy fold. 10-9-9-6-5. So what do we have here? We have a wrap and a flush draw and 3 hearts in our hand. So we have seen in the presentation before that a hand like 10-10-9-9-5 was actually going to check raise fold with 3 hearts, but here we actually have the wrap, but it's not super nutty. But I think it's still like, it's too many outs to consider check raise folding. So I think it's just a hand that we want to check call and then take it from there. And oh no, we are actually check raising. And then we're probably stacking off even with this hand. This is really interesting. Okay, ace jack 10-5 deuce. This will just be a fold. 6-6 5-5 4. We have no heart in our hand. Yes, we have a backdoor flush draw, but in general, like the weakest, like on a 2-tone board, the weak wraps will usually be just check folds. This hand as well, we have nothing going on for our hands, so those are just a bunch of easy check folds. Bottom 2 pair also should be like a super easy check fold for you in 5-card pillow. I mean, I think if you have played like 1000 hands of 5-card pillow, you will have realized that bottom 2 pair without backup is like not really a hand where you want to put any money into the pot. So we're just folding this. Queen jack 7-6-5. I think this is kind of the threshold. So whenever we have like a an open-ender with a flush draw, that's kind of the hand that we want to continue. Flush draw with a gut shot is not always a continue, but mostly a continue. But like open-ender with a flush draw is always a continue. We just have to figure out if we want to check raise it or if we want to check call it. I would personally check call this kind of hand, but it could be that this is one of the hands similar to the 10-10 9-9-5 from earlier. We will go for the check call here though, and Monker Solver liked it. This is a hand that we're going to fold. Again, bottom two pair, just very easy fold. Ace, king, jack, jack. You could argue, okay, we have a top pair blocker and a heart and two jacks. So in 4-card pillow, we've seen that hands like top pair with a pocket pair can be decent bluff check raises. And I think to a certain degree, that's also true in 5-card pillow. So we saw that in the presentation before, that a hand like ace, king, 3, deuce, deuce was a bluff check raise. But here I think we just don't have enough equity. Like, yes, we have some draw blockers, but we have nothing to back it up. Like, there's still, even if we have these blockers, like our opponent can still have so many hands that he could continue, and then we check raise this hand, and then we have a big problem on the turn usually. So I think this is just a check fold. Same as this hand, and then here we have bottom two with a little bit of backup, but I think even this, like with the gut shot, is not strong enough to continue. Here, pair with an open-ender, also not strong enough on a two-tone board. King, queen, 5-5-3, also not strong enough. As you can see, there's a bunch of folding. And then we have Jack 10, 8-7-7. And in general, with our bottom sets and middle sets, we always want to have backup in order to continue, or in order to consider check raising. And the question we always have to ask ourselves on the given board is how much backup do I need on this board? And so, for example, if the board is rainbow, and this is also why the check raising frequencies are so high, like I said, if the board is like Jack 8 deuce, for example, and you have middle set with a gut shot, like that's a pretty decent hand on a rainbow board. Here, however, I'm not sure if a gut shot qualifies. I would say we probably need to have a little bit of a stronger hand. Also, blocking the 8 doesn't really help, so I would probably just check call this. This one again, gut shot with bottom two, we're just folding. And here again, top pair. Now we even have the gut shot to the 6, but I don't think we can continue. So we're just folding, a bunch of folding. But as you can see here, I mean, we have a bunch of folding now, but also the other hand classes, they seem kind of clear. Like from my experience, they are way more clear cut compared to 4-card pillows. So when you actually study this spot or other spots when it comes to check raising, you will see it's actually kind of intuitive. And probably the thing that you want that is new to you or that you're not so familiar with is like the check raise folding. But once you have figured out the candidates for that, it's actually quite easy to adopt or to integrate this strategy into your game, I would say. So again, bottom two, we're just folding. We have a wrap here. This is also another threshold hand. So a wrap without a flush draw definitely is foldable on a two-tone board. I think, but some of these wraps are going to be calls. So when we have a hard blocker with a backdoor nut flush draw, for example, I can definitely see some calls, but I think this hand is slightly too weak. Oh no, it was actually barely good enough. But this is what I was talking about. So like the wraps are kind of the threshold hands. Some of them are going to call, some of them are going to fold. So the wraps without a flush draw, I mean. Just very easy fold again, easy fold again. And here, this is another threshold hand that I was talking about before, like gut shot with a flush draw. I think here we are going to call because we have a nut gut shot and the jack high flush draw. It's like, I mean, we're not thrilled about it, but it's definitely better than having like a 6 high flush draw or whatever. So because a jack high flush draw will sometimes be good. Our opponent can have a hand like a wrap with a 10 high flush draw, for example, and so on. So jack high flush draw is something we could work with, but definitely not a hand that we want to check raise given that we have no pair blockers to the board and we're not blocking. Like the queens are not really helping us in any way. So I think we're just calling. Ace 10, 10, 7, 6, no blockers to the board. I mean, a few blockers, but no heart. Very easy fold. Queen, 10, 9, 3, a little bit similar to the other hand that we had before, but this hand is stronger, so I think it's clearly a continue. The question is it strong enough to raise? And I think the answer is no. I think we want to have a little bit more backup equity, maybe a backdoor flush draw, maybe a pair blocker. and probably just a wrap like queen, queen, 10, 9, 6. I could see that being a check raise stack off, but not this hand. And then this is also somewhat interesting. Here we have a wrap with a flush draw, but it's a bad flush draw and a bad wrap. I still think this is good enough to continue, but this is also like, if we look at like the EV of this hand will probably not be very high. I mean, if we look at this, I mean, this hand is basically breaking even, and this is kind of sick, right? So we have a wrap with a flush draw, although the wrap is not really good. I see that the flush draw is not really good, but it's basically a break-even call. If you consider that, yeah, like maybe your opponents are not c-betting aggressively enough, like you could even consider starting to fold these hands. But yeah, as you can see here, these decisions were quite easy. Like I think a lot of the hand classes are actually quite clear when you do a little bit of work, like I said. What is interesting, what we could maybe do here is, if we exit the training really quick, and then we go for the check raise here, let him raise pot, and then we go to show big blind, and then we can briefly look at the check raise folds. And what is already interesting, what you can see here in the strength buckets, is that definitely two pair, like a third of our two pairs is just actually check raise folding, as you can see here. Three pair, a very decent hand category to go for the check raise fold. And then if we go through a bunch of these hands, we can see it's very often like a top pair with a low flush draw that goes for the check raise fold, sometimes with a backdoor flush draw, sometimes without. Some of these weaker draws that have a very good like draw blocking potential, like like a pocket pair around the board, like pocket nines here in this case, for example. We can also see a hand like queen jack 9 8 deuce. It's a little bit similar to the hand that we had before, but here the flush draw is less useful. So the 9 high flush draw is actually not as great as like a jack high or queen high flush draw, and so we don't mind just wasting this as a check raise fold, right? But also we have to keep in mind, like, this is only 2% weight. So yeah, a bunch in general. Also, one difference to 4-card pillow is if you look at the nut flush draws. So ace of hearts with another heart, we can see we're only check raise folding 9% of our nut flush draws, and that is definitely different in 4-card pillow. Like a lot of boards in 4-card pillow, you're more willing to check raise fold your nut flush draws. The difference is in 5-card pillow, you will just have way more backup usually together with your flush draw, with your nut flush draw. So you will have a nut flush draw with a pair, with an open-ender, and like all that kind of stuff. It's very hard in 5-card pillow to have a bare nut flush draw. But if we have a bare nut flush draw, or if we have a nut flush draw with a lot of heart blockers, like 4 hearts and a pair blocker here, ace, queen, jack, 8, 5, that hand makes sense to check raise fold. Anyway, I think this video is already long enough for a theory video. I hope I didn't lose you in the end here with a practice session. I think it's a very important spot. I think it's a very studied spot, at least from my experience, because I just don't see people check raise folding. I just don't see them check raising aggressively. So I think it's a very useful tool to have in your strategy, to have in your game. And if you have any questions about it, let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video. This was Supix for the Pilo 5-card Mastermind. Bye-bye.